You've probably tried this. You ask an AI for a business plan, maybe a research idea, and what you get back is, well, it's brilliant, but also kind of bonkers, right? It's this super common thing. The AI can cook up these incredibly new ideas, but they're almost always missing one key ingredient: practicality. So let's dive in and figure out why that is. Okay, so to really get a handle on AI creativity, we've got to first look at our own. Even someone like Einstein, he didn't believe that breakthroughs just appeared out of thin air. Nope, he said it was all about something he called combinatory play.
So what does that even mean? Well, at its core, creativity is really the art of connecting things that are already out there, just in new and surprising ways. You take a couple of things you already know, and you figure out a hidden path that links them together. It's really just a game of association.
Okay, so that leads to the big question, right? If creativity is just about making connections, and let's be honest, AI is an absolute master at finding patterns and connections, why does it so often spit out ideas that are, technically new, but also completely useless? That's the paradox we're going to unpack today, and it's all based on some really fascinating new research. All right, to get to the bottom of this, researchers decided to zero in on one very specific and really powerful type of creativity. We're talking about the kind of thinking that's behind some of the biggest leaps forward in human history. It's called combinatorial creativity. And the key thing to get here is that it's not about inventing something from scratch. It's about looking at all the familiar building blocks, the concepts we already get, and seeing how they can be clicked together in ways nobody's ever thought of before. And look, this is not some dry academic theory. This is literally the engine of history. Think about it. The printing press, not a totally new invention. It was a brilliant mashup of a wine press and a coin punch. Or Darwin's theory of natural selection. That came from him connecting the dots between how we breed animals and some ideas about population growth. This is how the big stuff happens. Now, it's really important to be clear about what we're talking about here. The researchers aren't looking at what you might call transformational creativity, the kind that completely rewrites the rule book like Einstein did with physics. No, they're focused on something that's more like being a master chef. You're using ingredients everyone knows, but you're creating a dish that nobody has ever tasted before. So, how in the world do you even begin to test an AI for that?
Well, to figure out where AI is tripping up, you can't just, ask it for more ideas. That won't work. You need a proper, controlled experiment. So what these researchers did was pretty clever. They built a kind of creative obstacle course, specifically for AI.
So picture this. They built this huge artificial map of ideas. Every little dot on the map is a concept, and the lines connecting them are the relationships between those concepts. Then they gave the AI a really simple mission. Find a path from this starting concept over here to this ending concept way over there. And in doing that, the AI is essentially creating a brand new combined idea. Okay, let's break down exactly how this challenge worked. First, you've got the map itself. That's the conceptual space. Second, the AI gets its prompt, its mission, to connect two faraway points. Third, and this part is absolutely crucial, it has to follow a set of rules, or what the researchers call constraints. Things like, hey, you have to include this concept on your path, or whatever you do, you cannot use that concept. And finally, every single idea the AI comes up with gets a score. And that score is basically its novelty multiplied by its utility, which is just a fancy way of saying how well it followed the rules. So they ran a whole bunch of different AIs through this obstacle course, again and again and again. And what they found, well, it revealed some really fundamental truths about how these things actually think when they're trying to be creative. Okay, finding number one. This was all about the AI's architecture, its actual structure. Turns out, when it comes to being creative, the size and shape of an AI's brain matters a lot. You can basically think of it like the Goldilocks story. The AIs that did the best, the most creative ones, they weren't the deepest and they weren't the widest. There was this just right sweet spot. See, if they were too shallow, they just couldn't figure out the complex paths. But if they were too deep and too narrow, they couldn't seem to hold enough different ideas in their head at once. But that wasn't the biggest discovery. The real bombshell, the thing that explains the whole paradox we started with, is this. The researchers found a direct and apparently unavoidable trade-off between how new an idea is and how useful it is. It worked like this. When the AI had very few rules to follow, low constraints, it came up with some wild, super novel, really surprising ideas. But
The moment the researchers started adding more and more rules, practical stuff like, hey, make sure this idea is cheap, or make sure you compare it to what's already out there, the novelty just tanked. The more practical they forced the AI to be, the more boring its ideas got.
And what's so powerful about this is how perfectly this abstract little experiment explains what we see in the real world. That exclusion constraint in their test, that's just like us telling an LLM, hey, don't suggest something that costs $1 billion. And that inclusion constraint, that's us saying, make sure you compare your idea to the status quo. The AI's struggle with these rules in the obstacle course, that's the exact same reason its ideas so often feel totally impractical when we try to use it.
So this brings us to a really profound conclusion. You know that frustrating gap between the AI's wild creative ideas and just plain old practical reality? Well, it might not be a bug. It might not be something we can just fix in the next software update.
But instead, it could be a fundamental, built-in feature of how these systems currently think.
And if that's true, it completely reframes the whole conversation, doesn't it? Maybe we've been asking the wrong question all along. Maybe it's not about can AI be creative or waiting for it to become some perfect human-like inventor. Instead, knowing this fundamental trade-off is there, the real question becomes, how can we be creative with it? How do we learn to work with this strange new partner, harnessing its incredible knack for novelty, while we, the humans, provide that crucial anchor to reality and usefulness?